Squint.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
Thursday, May 8th has been and gone. The squad is named, and with it, the squabbling can subside. The British and Irish Lions are rugby's great pub debate made manifest. A link to the history of the sport dropped into the middle of the professional games calendar. Traditions served up for the masses and made to work, like if pro teams did an interclub Boxing Day game, if we still made players not called George Furbank have moustaches like this for every single game, if Wales were allowed to win matches, or perhaps, I don't know, if the entire sport had native classism, excluded minorities, and an elitist attitude towards smaller nations that continue to hold it back. I don't know, just a few of the things in the old days. The Lions is the one time on the rugby calendar where high performance sits second to tradition. And yet, this tour, as with any other, Andy Farrell ultimately is heading out to win. Lions test matches are the second highest intensity games you can play after World Cup knockouts, and with this pinnacle on the horizon, is perhaps taking a moment to reflect on the rugby rather than just the tradition. The squad is now named, the coaches in place, and opposition lined up. With all the pieces now on the board, it's worth asking the question, how is Andy Farrell's British and Irish Lions team going to play? As is increasingly a part of this tradition, complaints about the 2025 tour were lodged from many quarters before a burn had been picked, never mind a ball had been kicked. Over the last 5 years, Farrell has developed a world-beating programme using the incredible resources of Leinster and their remarkable school system, more on that scene of a video. His core Ireland players are brought up playing the same game plan the national team adopt from the age of 12. They never learn any differently, having the system down to a T as a teen. Their decision-making process built, established within the context of the game plan they'll be playing once they reach the highest level. As such, the assumption was Farrell would basically select largely the Leinster team, play Leinster's style and system, and then probably call it a day. Yet the squad and coaches selected suggest it might not be that simple, that Farrell is instead looking to lean into that old Lions tradition and bring four nations' greatest strengths together after all. Imagine for a second that you are Andy Farrell. And once you've got through the burning resentment towards your own son, the disgust at yourself for being associated these days with that bloody union bollocks, just try and ask yourself, if you were to create a super team bringing together the best bits of each home nation's national team, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, which elements of those four would you want to steal? I'd imagine your answer is you would want Ireland's attack, England's kicking game, Scotland's slickness, and Wales's Jack Morgan, and preferably as little else from Wales as possible. And so, that's exactly what Andy Farrell has taken. Scotland in this year's Six Nations had, statistically, the worst line-out of any home nation in terms of percentage, losing more balls on their own throw than anyone else. Yet that only tells you a tiny part of the story. For forwards coach Don Dale's system is not about raw percentage, but rather the wider whole. They may lose more balls, but no team generates possession for the backs to play off better than Scotland. Their gain line success is generally around 54% over the last couple of years. Wales are the only tier 1 team over the last 12 months worse than them on that. And yet, first phase off lineouts, that stat jumps to 69%. A very nice best in the world of anyone above the Springboks or All Blacks. Most teams play about 10 to 15% of their lineout ball to the tail, then split the remainder of the front and middle fairly evenly, fairly 50-50, maybe 60-40 to the front. But Scotland, on the other hand, play about a quarter of their total balls to the back, to the tail. Since DL took post in 2020, Scotland have thrown upwards of 20% of their overall line-out balls to the tail in every single campaign. They want to grant the backs the best ball to possibly play off. DL has a background coaching in sevens, and it shows in the way Scotland use the line-out. It's a quick restart tool to get the ball into the hands of Finn Russell or Sione Tuipulotu as fast as possible. In fact, the front ball stats are actually padded by how often Scotland do this to up the pace, just popping it short to take a second and a half off the line-out. Any area where the coach selected is not Irish has to come with a reason. Why Andy Farrell has selected John DL to run the forward pack, and particularly the line-out, his speciality. And this feels like why. All of this allows you to get the attack up and running so much quicker. Perhaps the most surprising name read out by Ian Evans last week was that of Glasgow lock Scott Cummings, a fairly unheralded second row who missed this year's Six Nations. Yet the key to understanding Farrell's Lions might be to ask not why Cummings was included ahead of Ireland's Ryan Baird or Wales's Dav Jenkins, but rather Scotland teammate Grant Gilchrist. the guy who calls DL's Scotch lineout. Instead of taking a player like Gilchrist or Adam Beard, a specialist lineout captain, a role we've seen the likes of Beard, George Cruz and Jeff Parling included purely to play on the past few tours, Farrell instead wants every player to be a ball handler. Scotland's system often reduces him to a smash merchant, but watch him for Glasgow and it's clear Cummings has a real subtlety to his game. He's got a lovely offload on him, a surprising turn of pace, and perhaps most importantly, he hits really good lines. This is a core part of Andy Farrell's system. Everybody should be in motion at all times. Speed getting back up off the floor after making a carry, hitting a ruck, making a tackle is critical, but where Gilchrist may be back up to his feet slightly quicker, the impact Cummings can make once he's on them has been valued above the split-second difference reloading. These lines of running become particularly important once you get into the 22, where it's their key weapon. Farrell doesn't like guys just running straight into the opposition and trying to power over their opponent, but rather hitting angles and hitting weak shoulders. This is something that Jack Morgan and the most talked about inclusion, Henry Pollock, are both exceptional at. And Cummings gives you an additional player who can do that. The ability to shift the picture of the defense last second by changing their line is critical. Cummings' selection over Gilchrist points to what Farrell wants in a lock, as we're likely going to see them as the primary ball handlers off most phases of play. Ireland have broadly played a 1-3-2-2 shape his entire tenure, with little bumps of trialling a 4-pod and trialling wider pods more recently, but I'd expect the Lions at their core to run a most basic shape that looks something like this. A 3-pod comprised of a lock and 2 props, with a 10 at the back able to link up with not just one of the centres, but 2 further floating sets of forwards. Likely one of the flankers, probably in the Josh van der Fleer, Jack Morgan role, running incredibly hard, this kind of flood line off the 10 to carry it, to smash it right up. Because if it was evident Farrell wasn't too focused on line-out percentage from his locks and coaches, it goes triple when looking at his back row selection. Whilst 4 of the 6 locks can play on the flank, including Cummings, who may well be going as the Courtney Laws style hybrid player, Farrell has selected the back row for what they can do when the ball is in play. Every flanker loaded up can jump, but none of them are specialists, and only really Jack Conan and Tom Curry regular options for club or country. Jack Morgan and Henry Pollock have each taken 4 lineouts across 25 and 24 games so far this season, whilst Josh van der Fleer and Ben Hill have each taken just a single lineout across 22 and 24 games this year. And yet, whilst they may not be lineout jumpers, one thing they really do have is the ability to build a beautiful website, all thanks to Squarespace. The world's easiest to use website builder, Farrell introduced the squad to Squarespace immediately. They got it in their initial introductory email, just saying, well, if you want to build a website to build your brand, well, now you're a Lion, why not go ahead and do that? And boy, did they embrace it. Henry Pollock had only heard of websites 3 weeks earlier. He's that young, he only knows apps, and yet he got addicted. There he was, building them now in time, adding new features, adding all sorts. It's so simple to put together. Even a literal child like Henry Pollock can put it together in mere moments. And if you want to do exactly the same and build your own beautiful website, then you can head to the link in the description and use the offer code SquidRugby to save yourself some money when building a lovely, lovely website that you can use if you happen to be in the Lions squad. Even if you weren't, you can build a website saying you were, and no one will ever correct you. Other than 6'4" Jack Conan, the Lions have almost exclusively stuck to the same identical mould of flanker. Curry just about tips over into 17, but the others are all 6 foot or 6'1" and 16 stone something. But just as every lock is a ball carrier, every flanker here is someone who carries a lot of ball. Farrell has always selected on work rate, but with such an embarrassment of Ritchie's, it looks as though he's prioritised carrying for the flankers above hitting rucks or necessarily even tackles made. Rory Darge and Jeremy Ritchie have absurd work rates, but average about 1 carry for every 5 rucks hit, and instead he's looked at the likes of Morgan and Van der Fleer, who are much closer to even, and indeed Ben Earl, who achieved the extremely rare feat of making more carries than cleanouts, and Conan, who was 1 touch of the ball off breaking even over the Six Nations. The back row's job for this Lions team is going to be to carry. Yet whilst the number 8 may find themselves in that congested middle pod looking for raw yards, we're almost definitely going to see those flankers deployed wider out on, indeed, the flanks. Every single back rower selected here regularly plays as an edge forward in the wide channels for either club or country, and that looks to be how Farrell intends to play them. The inclusion of Henry Pollock over Jack Willis, Ben Curry or Peter O'Mahony makes this especially evident. The Lions intend to play wide often, unleashing big carriers down those wings to generate further front football after the lineouts. But the real element might not be how often they go wide, but how fast they can get there. If there's one uniting factor on the halfback selected, it's not their raw ability, their flair, or even their game management. It's their pass. It's the absolute core skill of how well they can pass a rugby ball. Of the players in realistic contention, sorry Alec Davis, the 6 selected by Farrell are, with the exception of Sam Prendergast, whose continued knack for reaching for the tag belt instead of making a tackle likely counted him out, the 6 best raw passers of the ball in Britain and Ireland. Finn Russell speaks for himself. The only folk with stronger wrists than him are those watching his highlights on the loop, but pigeonholing of the Smiths has spread a miserable lie and caused many to overlook just how good at distributing the bloody ball they both are. Northampton have basically built their entire system around Finn Smith's wrists, able to flick passes instantly the moment his eye knows it's over on over the top. And the spreading idea that Marcus Smith is a selfish player is frankly utter bollocks. Look at the way he was able to unleash players around him in the autumn. In fact, you can go one further. Duan van der Merwe is the only player in this entire backline not comfortable working his distributor out the back of a group of forwards. Like the Leinster system, the Lions are clearly setting up to be able to play anywhere to anyone quickly. Gibson Park has possibly the fastest pass in the world, post, nug, whilst Mitchell and Williams are both incredibly quick to the ruck, all three capable of throwing enormous skip passes and missing entire pods of forwards to keep the attack flowing. Whilst all three forwards are excellent kickers, including for goal, I doubt the Lions, however, are going to lean on them too much. One sticking point in any and every team selected by Andy Farrell is he likes to have a left-footed option somewhere in that backline, and preferably an absolute cannon instead of a mere option. Something that I suspect has proven critical in the selection of Elliot Daly. Him and James Lowe are the only out-and-out left-footers in this entire backs division, so expect to see at least one of them play pretty much every single game on tour. You'll probably see one of them in starting 15 in all 8 games. As Lowe's left foot has allowed Ireland to exit like this, thumping it incredibly low in play, inviting the opposition to run it back on the side where the other kickers in the team are weaker, meaning that Ireland essentially have no weakness when it comes to getting out of their own 22. The Lions will likely run this way because this element of Farrell's system slots almost perfectly into the tactics dreamt up by England's Richard Wigglesworth, a man labelled by Farrell with the fairly generic title of assistant coach for this Lions tour. Wigglesworth was initially brought in by Steve Borthwick as a kick strategy coach, later transitioning to take over the attack as well. But with Ireland's Andrew Goodman there to run the attack alongside Farrell, I suspect Wigglesworth hasn't been called up to be a third attack coach, but rather to focus on the bluter. England's kick strategy was a key, some might say the biggest part of their success in this year's Six Nations. The broad idea is they kick very long whenever in their own half, looking to put oppositions in situations where they will have to exit themselves. This usually comes off 9, the scrum half themselves, box kicking clear, with the winger chasing. Whilst winning it in the air would be lovely if they could, the realistic goal for the winger is to smash the catcher and put their defence then on the front foot. England's D is incredibly aggressive and can ideally then force them backwards a phase on phase until they squeeze an error, perhaps there's a knock on or someone drops the ball. But kind of worst case scenario, the opposition will still get themselves going backwards in their own half and kick the ball back to England, in which case the Roses almost always run the ball, at least on that first phase. This was a huge part of the reasoning behind deploying Marcus Smith at fullback. As the quickest player able to play 15 in the squad, he could physically eat up more meters after the catch than anybody else. It's fairly simple when you think about it from your maths point of view, which is very much the Steve Borthwick way. England boot the ball 40 metres upfield, forces the opposition 10 metres back with their defence. So, if the opposition then kick it 30 metres, and Smith or Furbank can make up 10 metres before the first tackle comes, it grants England a total net gain of 30 metres. If it had perhaps been Freddie Stewart at fullback and he can only make up 5, it's only a 25 metre net gain. It's a pure maths equation, and it hopefully puts their attack on the front foot. It tends to leave the defence a bit scrambled, creating situations the likes of Smith and Russell can thrive in. One centre gets tied in the kick chase, say, and now they're man light out wide, or the prop is going back and forth, and is yet to set properly into the defensive position, creating opportunities to attack. But if it doesn't, England traditionally set up and then just box kick again after a phase or so. This time shallow at about 15 to 20 metres, basically restarting the process and hoping to force the opposition to give them more open prairie this time if they don't win it back in the air. I think we'll see the Lions adopt almost exactly this strategy, with Lowe and Daly being used as left-footed options to exit if they're on the left side in their own 22, instead of keeping everything off 9 as England do. This does raise the question mark of who chases if the winger is booting it long, but we've seen both Tom Curry deployed as a primary kick chase on the last Lions tour, and most interestingly, Dan Sheehan played that winger role, chasing Lowe's kicks for Leinster, so we may see them just use a forward in that role, if not having the fullback or a centre fill in. And this is what makes the hooker position perhaps one of the most fascinating in the squad, as it's the one place where Farrell has really stuck to his systematic guns. In the traditional Leinster Ireland system, the hooker is almost exclusively deployed as an edge forward, hanging out on the wing to link up or clear out. As such, Jamie George and Dewi Lake, two exceptional players, and without wanting to bring my personal opinions into this, you could argue are better players than Cowan, Dickey or Keller, who got in, missed out because they're best used in the middle. They're forwards who want to be in that free pod in the centre of the field. If you selected Dewi Lake for the Lions, you'd have to adapt their shape so he's being used as a second number 8, which is point difference. It's what he wants to do. It's what he's best at. Why wouldn't you use him there? But that likely means bumping the other flanker out the wing and changing your system instead of allowing them to be a flood line off the fly half, taking a runner out of your attack, or forcing you to use a second row who's less effective in those wide channels. It just has such a knock-on effect. And whilst Jamie George can run any role, he doesn't really have the pace anymore to be of impact out wide, where Kelleher and Cowan Dickey are both very comfortable regularly playing that role for their clubs. Yet I think Cowan Dickey's inclusion is perhaps more interesting defensively, for he provides the Lions with a brilliant chop tackle option. This is a team full, including backs, of jackal threats, and having a few players stuff throughout the squad who can create those turnover chances by getting guys to deck immediately could be invaluable. For the same reason, I'd wager Gareth Thomas is way up the pecking order of call-ups than most would suspect of Wales' second choice. Yet Cowan Dickey's other key stat is the sheer amount of defensive rucks he hits. Ireland are generally a team who like to make mini counter rucks to slow the opposition ball down as the 9 is reaching to pick it up. And Cowan Dickey is one of the best in the game at that, hitting more defensive rucks than any other Lions eligible hooker this season. With Simon Easterby running the defence, you'd imagine they'll broadly deploy the Irish system, the one area they differ from Leinster. It's a kind of smother defence. Ireland have made fewer dominant tackles than anyone else in the Six Nations 2 years in a row now, because it's not about forcing you backwards, it's about cutting off your options. Ireland's defence is an almost perfect inversion of their attack, which is all about creating numbers, so instead, their defence is all about taking numbers away. They want to remove as many options from the defence as possible. Be that forcing an extra forward to come in and commit to the ruck by smashing it, just trying to put pressure on, removing them as a carrying option, or letting Keenan fly in from fullback to pressure a passer, or by having the likes of Ringrose on low shoot out a line to cut off the passing channels. Ireland had the worst tackle success of any team in this year's championship, yet the complementary stat that tells you the whole picture is that they also had a lower percentage of the missed tackles leading to tries than any other side. It's defence built on fail-safes. Missing one tackle doesn't matter so long as you prevent the ball getting out wide, getting into positions where it can be dangerous. And there isn't a player in this squad who doesn't fit that system brilliantly. I'd put particular mention on Hugh Jones, who would really benefit in the role of how Ireland run with their 13 in defence. Likewise, at scrum time, just expect to see the Irish style transplanted, really. Andrew Porter gets a lot of heat for one, the angle he scrummages at, and two, the well-worn Leinster tactic of pre-engaging. Essentially, taking the hit away by getting too close to your opposite number too early. Similar to Gethin Jenkins in the day, some referees love and reward the way he scrummages, giving penalty after penalty after penalty because it looks dominant. Others hate it because it looks like he's on the angle. And so a lot will come down. The referees' lines are given, and it looks, on that front, like they've got pretty lucky in the hole. James Dolman, in charge of the Argentina game first up, gave everything Porter's way against Scotland this year, whilst Andrea Piardi is doing the second test and probably runs the Andrew Porter is a legal scrummager Facebook page. This scrum against Australia is a perfect example. Despite both props being in on the ankle, Piardi plays it on and he gives a penalty on the next scrum to Ireland because he's now got it in his head that Ireland are dominant. Ben O'Keefe, running the first test, is a play-it-on guy who tends to just like the ball getting away from the 8's feet regardless of what goes on in the front row, so gives very few scrum penalties. So we'll probably be fine, but the real wild card will come in the final game of the tour as Nika Amishar-Kelly takes the whistle. It's now a full 4 years since Nika last reffed Leinster or Ireland, and that makes it as such pretty impossible to tell what stance he'll take on Porter come the decisive test, but he is a guy who gives a lot of penalties to teams that appear to be going backwards if their technique is stronger, and so it may be time in that final test to, even if Porter's been brilliant in the first 2 tests, switch in Ellis Genge, who, when refereeing England, he has rewarded pretty regularly. It all comes together to bring in the best elements of all 4 nations. The British and Irish Lions are rugby's great pub debate made manifest, yet now the exciting time is truly upon us. We can all sit there and create fantasy 15s of the best players in any random combinations of nations, and for our hottest takes, Santiago Arata would start a 9 for a Southern Hemisphere team for one. Yet Andy Farrell now has the brilliant task of trying to turn that magic into science, trying to work out a path to actually playing, and indeed, down the line, winning with a team assembled as a bit of fun. Thursday, May 8th has been and gone. The squad is named, and with it, the squabbling can subside. Now, all that remains is to see them play.
Thanks for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. This is, I think, the conclusion for now of our Lion stuff. There's so much of it back on the channel.
We've done 9 hours worth of Lion stuff.
It's a lot of Lion stuff.
We're going to not think about Lions for a couple of weeks. We are going to think about Australia.
We're going to have a look at Australia. We're going to have a look at a particular player who's building a lot of hype at the moment. And
he's very exciting.
They're living up to it. We're going to look at the USA.
American things.
We like American things. And we're going to look at plenty more. The Champions Cup final is coming up, so we'll have a look at that, have a look around building it up and breaking it down. There's so much more we're going to be looking at before we get into that Lions tour in June. We'll see you then for that. In the meantime, I hope you... thank you to everyone that supports the channel on Patreon. Hugely appreciated. It makes all of this continue to be possible.
And we'll keep talking to you guys in the Discord.
Yeah.
We like you.
And in the meantime, please, we'll see you soon for more
rugby.
Just more. We'll just see you soon for more.
Okay, bye.
Elliot Daly. Saracens in England. James Ryan. Leinster Rugby and Ireland.